What a subject. An incredible subject, to say the least. I guess we can boil it down by just putting this on the screen. Is God real? Is there really a God? Is God real? Well, you see that statement on the screen. If we just rearrange those letters without adding any to and taking any away, you have your answer to that subject. And this is particularly important to a lot of our young teenagers here. You know, you go through life thinking, oh, look, this world seems to keep going on forever. It's getting cleverer and cleverer. Everything seems to be fine and fantastic, and especially here in Australia, we are so divorced from the world problems. We think everything's fine. Is there really a God? Is there even a need for a God? So is God real? Well, just rearrange those letters and you'll have your answer to that question. Because when you rearrange those letters, you get that. And God and Israel are two inseparable entities, if you like, if we can call them, that prove that God is definitely in control of this world, and he definitely does exist. And Israel is the heartbeat of the Christadelphian hope. I have to tell you, every time this passage of scripture that Philip read for us this evening is read, I get goosebumps, because if it wasn't for Israel, I don't know where I would be. And God says that. He said, you want proof I exist? He says, you look at Israel, because I have set them apart from any other nation on the planet, that they are going to be my witnesses that I exist. Now, does that mean Israel's better than any other nation on the planet? No, it doesn't. But God's made specific promises to that nation, to the fathers of that nation, that he intends on keeping. And Israel have let God down time and time again, but God never goes back on his promises. And we're going to see that they are indeed God's witnesses, because as we look at Israel, we're going to see very quickly tonight. It's going to be fairly rushed. I'm sorry about that, but we do have to get through a bit of information. We're going to have a look at their remarkable survival and their amazing revival as a nation. And they are truly God's witnesses. When you read those words in Isaiah 43, you know what God is doing? He's holding out a challenge. He's saying to all the nations around at the time, he's saying, hey, I want to see proof that your gods are real. Bring your proof to the table. It's like a courtroom scene. You know, when they use the term witnesses and you bring your witnesses, it's like a courtroom scene. And God is saying, come on, all you nations, bring your witnesses to the table. Bring them there so that we can have a real good look to see if your gods are real. Well, of course, nobody responds to the challenge, because their gods at the time were gods of wood and stone and nothing of substance at all. So there's deathly silence. And then God says, righto, it's my turn. I'm going to put Israel in the witness box as a nation, as an identity, as a culture, as a people. And I want you to keep your eyes on that nation, because all throughout the generations, and this is a prophecy of 2,500 years ago, but all throughout the generations, right up to this very day, God has said, when you look at Israel, you will see me working in that nation, that I do truly exist. Some fast facts about this little nation. It's a little nation. Seriously, it is very small. I know a lot of you have seen this slide before, but a lot of you also haven't. So up on the map there, I've got a map of Australia. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to superimpose over that 3 maps of Israel, various sizes. I'm going to get you to all sort of work out which side you think Israel is in conjunction with Australia. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because I want to show you from a perspective of the size of this nation, right, how important it is, and its position of world relevance is absolutely mind-blowing. It is incredible. Why? Why has such a little nation just garnered so much attention from the world's media? Not just now with the terrible things that are going on over there, and we decided, by the way, not to talk about those things at the moment. It's in our news. We know what's going on. It's terrible. We wanted this to be more positive and just go back a step or two and just show how important it is that Israel proves there is a God. And then once we know there is a God, everything else that's falling in place around the world, particularly in the Middle East, all will start to make sense. So here's the three sizes of Israel that I've put on the screen. 1, 2 and 3. So the question is, put your hands up if you think Israel is size 1. No one's putting their hands up. Put your hands up if you think it's size 2. Yep, we've got a few there. Good, excellent. Put your hands up if you think it's size 3. Yeah, I knew that would happen. Size 3. Everyone puts their hands up for size 3. Well, guess what? It isn't size 1 and it isn't size 3. And it's not size 2. Israel is that big compared to Australia. Israel fits 367 times into our country, and yet for their size they are at the centre of politics, they are at the centre of the world's politics, and they appear in the media 50 times more than any other country in the world per head of population. 50 times! Why? How can that be? Why? Because God says, I'm putting you in the witness stand to prove to this world there's something special about you and that I actually am behind what is going on in your lives. That's what it's all about. So Israel is very small compared to Australia. But I tell you what, you can almost name a lot of things that are going on in Israel at the present moment of time and in the past because we know so much about Israel. How tiny is it? Well, let's have a little look at some other fast facts. It makes up just 0.25% of the land mass of the Middle East. 0.25% of the land mass of the Middle East. It makes up just 0.004% of the world's land mass. It is such a dot on the world globe, geographically speaking. Its population is only 0.1% of the world's population. It's the only country that has never lost its national identity or culture. Despite the fact that they were dispersed out of their country nearly 2,000 years ago for a period of nearly 2,000 years, they never lost their identity, they never lost their culture. Why? How can that possibly be? This quote's going to keep coming into your minds. If you walk away with one thing tonight, please walk away with that quote there. Israel, you're my witnesses that I am God, that I do exist. Isaiah 43. It's a very important part of your Bible, young people. I've got these coloured in. I've coloured these in when I was a teenager. I got taught the principles of these verses here. Well, it's really worth colouring in your Bible. Here's something interesting about Israel. The global Islamic population is approximately 1.2 billion, not million, 1.2 billion. 1,200,000,000, or 20% of the world's population. 20% of the world's population are Muslim. And there's the various Nobel Prizes that the Muslim population has achieved. Welcome, Gillard. Lovely to have you with us. Come on in. If I get anything wrong, Professor Gillard here will correct me, because I understand you speak 10 different languages fluently. 13, sorry, my mistake. 13 fluent languages. Absolutely brilliant man. I'll only be speaking English tonight, so we'll hopefully get our facts correct. But here you go. Here's the Islamic record of how many Nobel Prizes have been won by the Islamic world. It's quite interesting there. Yasser Arafat won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1994. Quite amazing, isn't it? So there's the Islamic world, 1.2 billion. Remember how the population of Israel? 0.02% of the world's population. Well, here's what they received in the Nobel Prizes. Here we go. Sorry for those down the back that you may not be able to see all these. But there is the list of the Nobel Prizes that have been won by the Jewish community since the Nobel Prizes began to be delivered. Is that coincidence? That's not trying to pit Jews against the Islams. In fact, really, from a point of view, there's been more Nobel Prizes won by the Jewish community per head of population than any other community and language and nationality upon the face of the earth. Why? Because they're God's witnesses. He says in Isaiah 43, I put you in the witness stand. I want people to know that there's something special about you and that you are a chosen people. So where does it all begin? Well, it all begins back here with this man. I think we've all heard of this man. This man's name's been used recently when Donald Trump was in power, of course, because they used his name when they brought about peace with some of the Arab countries, UAE and Israel, and they called it the Abraham Peace Accord. And they based it on Abraham because he is the father of the Jewish people. He's also the father of the Arab people. You might not have realised that. But God said to that man, special man that he was, and God could see that he was special. He lived in Ur of the Chaldees at the time, which is modern day Iraq today. And he looked down at that man and he said, I've got something in mind for you if you will follow me to a land that I want to give to you and to your descendants. And Abraham did that, and he followed God to the land of Canaan, the land of Israel today. And God says, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, and your nation will be great that will come from you. I will bless those that bless you. Those that curse you, I'll curse. All the earth will be blessed through you. Well, what happened? Well, Abraham gave birth to two sons. One by the mother, his Egyptian maiden slave was Hagar, and she gave birth to Ishmael, the firstborn to Abraham. He also had Sarah as a wife, and she gave birth a few years later to Isaac. It's quite interesting how these two here went their own ways and what actually ended up happening. Well, Ishmael ended up having 12 sons, by the way, and they became the Arab race of people. They came out of Ishmael. On the other hand, Isaac had Jacob, who in turn had 12 sons, who in turn became the fathers, if you like, of the Jewish race, the Jewish culture, the Jewish people. They're cousins. They're blood related right back to Abraham, and yet for centuries, for millennia, they have been fighting each other. And no more than what they are today in that land, they are still fighting each other. Wouldn't it be great if we could see that as a reality in the Middle East? Jew and Arab finally forgetting their differences and getting on with each other as one family from the one Father. Well, guess what? That is going to happen. But it won't happen under Netanyahu's rule. It won't happen under the Hamas rule. It won't happen under Biden's rule. It won't happen under Scott Morrison's rule over Australia. It's not going to happen under the auspices of any person on this planet at the present moment of time, but it will happen because God has said, I'm going to intervene, I'm going to bring that to pass. I'm going to get Arabs and Jews back together once again. Oh, how wonderful that will be, and I'm pretty certain we're all looking forward for that day, and don't worry, we won't have to wait too much longer before that will be a reality, but there's a lot to happen first. So what happens? Well, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and the 12 sons, or Jacob and his 12 sons, ended up down in Egypt for a period of over 200 odd years. They, in turn, multiplied dramatically, became a great people. Joseph, of course, was their leader, if you like, at the time, and Pharaoh really enjoyed the company of Joseph, and so did subsequent pharaohs. And then the record says, and one day a pharaoh rose who had forgotten all about Joseph. All he could see was 2 million Jews in the land of Goshen presenting a problem to us Egyptians. We got to get rid of them, or we got to make it tough for them. And he did. And we know this. I'm sure many of you are aware of the story. Pharaoh oppressed the Jewish people at that era in time, and God raised up this man here, Moses, to be a deliverer, to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. And he did. But first he needed a bit of training. He spent 40 years in Pharaoh's household, learning the Egyptian way of life, realised it wasn't really for him, ended up the next 40 years in the Midian desert, learning how to be a shepherd, and then the final 40 years was to lead the people out of Egypt into the promised land, which took a period of time, of probation, if you like, for the Jewish people. But here's something interesting. The first introduction that God had with Moses, what an amazing event this was. This is the first time that God revealed himself to Moses. Now, if I was God, I would reveal myself in the most dramatic fashion you could ever think of. I would shake every mountain in the region. I would send thunder, lightning, earthquakes, you name it. I would do any of those things to impress upon this man who was specifically chosen to be a leader. I want to impress him with who I am. You know what God does? He reveals himself to Moses with a very simple but powerful miracle. He reveals himself to Moses in a burning bush. He reveals himself to Moses by setting fire to a bush in the middle of the desert. There wouldn't have been too many bushes around in the middle of the desert, but he sets this bush on fire. And Moses, this is his first revelation of the God that he's about to really get to know. Well, what on earth was that all about? The bush never burnt. It stayed green. It remained absolutely green. Now that's a miracle in itself. So here's Moses. He can feel the intense heat of this bush just burning. And as he's looking, he's going, that bush is staying green. It's not burning up. We don't know how long that took place over a period of time with God revealing himself, but it's obviously long enough for Moses to go, this is very strange, that bush is not burning. What was God trying to tell Moses? This is how God revealed himself to Moses. Well, in the Bible, the flames actually represent trials. They represent the flames of trial that come upon us. The bush in the Bible represents Israel. Israel is known as a bush, it's known as a vine, it is known as the fig tree. So God uses these terms to describe his people. So what is God trying to tell Moses here? He's saying to Moses, I want you to know something, Moses. You're about to lead people out of Israel. There are going to be 2 million of them. You're going to bring them out of Israel, out of Egypt, and you're going to bring them into a promised land that I'm going to show you. But I want to tell you this, all throughout their history, the Jewish people are going to have the flames of trial always with them. They're going to go from persecution to persecution to persecution, trial after trial after trial. But I am guaranteeing you, Moses, they will never, ever, ever, ever be put out of existence. Ever. They will always remain an entity. They'll always remain a culture. And if you want to look at any nation on the planet of the earth that has endured as much tribulation, as much trial, as much persecution, you won't find any other nation greater than the nation of Israel. And that's why God said in the Bible, he said in Malachi, I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob, talking about Israel, you are not consumed. When thou, Israel, walk through the fire, you will not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. In other words, you're not going to be put out of existence. And when you have a look at the nations that have tried to put Israel out of existence over the past 3,000 years, have a look at them. And this is by no means exhaustive. This is major nations that have tried to persecute and put Israel out of existence. You've got the Egyptians, you've got the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines. We can go on, Crusaders, the Spanish Inquisition, Nazi Germany. We can relate to that because that happened at least in our parents' lifetime. Some of you here may have been alive when that happened. Right now, Hamas would love to put Israel out of existence. They've all tried. Where are they? Where are these nations now? Where's their power base? They're all gone. Those who prey upon you will I give as a prey, said God through the prophet Jeremiah. Where is the mighty Egyptian empire today? Where's the Persian empire? Where's Hitler's Third Reich? They're all gone. Where's Israel? Back in the land, strong, resilient, powerful. You are my witnesses, says God. I've put you there for a reason, and I want this world to know that I exist because everything I've said about you is going to come to pass. And it is, and we can see that. We can see it. Well, of course, the Jews inhabited the land of Israel for a period once they came into the promised land. They inhabited that land for around 1,500 years until the Romans had said, oh, we've had enough. The Roman Empire came along. We've had enough of your persistent revolts and rebellion. And so the Romans unwittingly fulfilled another part of God's plan and purpose, and that was to scatter Israel throughout all the world. So the Romans, who were controlling Judea, as it was known then, decided that this is it. We've got to get rid of the Jews out of this land and breed them out. Let's just send them to all parts of the Roman Empire and we'll get them bred out of existence. That was their plan. And God said, I will scatter you among the nations and I will disperse you throughout all the countries. And they were. And the Romans sent them to all places of the Roman Empire. Only a little remnant remained in Israel. And the whole idea was, let's get them out of the land and let them totally breed themselves out. Their culture's gone, and at long last the Jews won't be with us. Oh no, because God said that ain't going to happen. I'm actually going to bring them back to the land. And he gave this marvellous prophecy, which we haven't got time to read, in Ezekiel chapter 37, where he talks about the Israel as being like scattered bones throughout a desert, dry bones in the desert, where that indicates they've been there for a long time in this position, where they are not back in the land. They're not part of a national identity, but God says, you know what, I'm going to get each one of those bones and I'm going to start connecting them all back together. It's going to be a little process, but when I get them all back together, I am going to breathe life into them and they're going to stand up, a living entity, a powerful army, once again. That's what God said in Ezekiel 37, 2,500-year-old prophecy. This isn't real clear, but I'm going to play this on the speakers here, and all it is basically a little take of Ezekiel chapter 37, which most of it you'll see on the screen. Hopefully you can understand it, but here's what this little section of Ezekiel 37 says.
The hand of the Lord was upon me. He brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, O sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the voice of the Lord. I will make breath into you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them. But there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, and say to it, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army.
Well, that's a pretty dramatic prophecy. We haven't got time to look at it tonight, but can I just tell you this, that Ezekiel 37, the idea of the bones coming together, the bones are an inscription, if you like, on the Knesset Parliament in Jerusalem, where the walls or the fence around the Knesset, the heart of Israel being Knesset, like our Parliament House, and the walls, the fence around the Knesset is made up of all these bones. They understand what Ezekiel 37 is all about, or somebody did, and they put it all there. And the heart of all those bones coming together is straight inside those walls at the Knesset, because life has been breathed in them and they are now a nation once again. Absolutely incredible. God says, I will bring them into their own land and I will make them one nation in the land upon the nation of Israel. Now, how is God going to do that? How was he going to bring Israel back to the land? This was no mean feat. This was something that was going to be quite a task to do. Well, he tells us how he's going to do it. And he says in Jeremiah 16, he says, I am going to send for fishers, and fishers will come, and they will endeavour to fish you back to the land. And I'll also send hunters will come, and they will hunt you from every place of your existence to hunt you back to the land. That's what God said would happen. Who were these fishers? Well, you probably couldn't get a greater fisherman than this man here. He's probably arguably the greatest Jewish fisherman of modern times. He was so keen to fish and attract Jews to return them back to their homeland, but the problem was there was no homeland to return to. Israel at that time was under the control of the Ottoman Turks, known as Palestine. It wasn't Israel's land. They did not have a homeland to return to. So the question is, how was God going to use this man to somehow fish them back to a land that didn't exist? Well, he was instrumental in holding a Jewish Congress in Switzerland in 1898, and he got a lot of support from the Jewish hierarchy, but no one wanted to return to Palestine. They couldn't go there anyway because they weren't welcome really to go back there. So he didn't know what to do until the British said, you know what, we can see the plight you're in. We understand you not having a homeland. We have got this fantastic little country in Africa called Uganda. Oh, it's pretty rich. It's actually quite a wealthy little country in Africa. What about you take Uganda as being the homeland for the Jews? Now, as much as Theodore Herzl did not want to accept that, he thought it might be a good idea to take up the offer as an interim country for Jews to return to. Many opposed him, but there was a majority that accepted it, and so they were ready to sign off on the Uganda policy. Now, this is really interesting. God said, I'm going to bring you back into your own land. I'm going to bring you back into the land of Israel, your ancient territory. The British government and Theodore Herzl and the Zionist movement were all ready to sign off on not going back to their own land, going to Uganda, into Africa. How was this going to play out? Was mankind going to be successful in breaking God's mould? He's made this prophecy, he's made a mould. Mankind looked like they were going to break it. How was this all going to pan out? Well, have a look at what could have happened. There's the nation of Africa. If the Zionist movement at the time, in 1903, had signed off, that's where Israel would be today. Gillard, there it is. And by the way, another place was also mooted at the time of the Kimberley Ranges in the top of Western Australia. Could you imagine having a nation of Israel up there in the top of Western Australia? It would have been quite interesting, wouldn't it? But here's where it was going to go. Now, God said, no, it's not going to go there. How's God going to deal with that? They're ready to sign on the dotted line. The poorer Jews of Europe might have definitely gone and flooded back there. The rich Jews wouldn't have moved. But that was where the fisherman was putting the bait out and trying to fish them back to. How was God going to deal with it? You want to know how he's going to deal with it? Well, first of all, let's reinforce what God said. He said, I'm not taking you back to Uganda. I'm bringing you to your own land, to the nation of the land, and make you one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, not Uganda. How was God going to deal with it? That man suddenly died at the age of 44 of a heart attack. Taken off the scene. He was the driving force of the Zionist movement. Sure, there were others. He was the driving force. As soon as that man was gone, the British said, oh, this is all going to fall over. So they actually withdrew the invitation of Uganda as being a homeland. They took it out of the picture. And now it's all open again. And this man comes along. This man was quite an amazing character. His name is Chaim Weizmann. He was born in Belarus. He emigrated to the UK in the late 1890s. He was a very smart biochemist. The British Parliament actually held him in very high regard because he was able to formulate acetone or synthetic cobalt, which helped with the gunpowder, which helped with the British wars. They actually held this man in very high degree. So much so that he was able to get an audience with the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, who happened to be a man by the name of Lord Balfour. He was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, the UK at the time, when Chaim Weizmann had an audience with him in 1905, 2 years after the Uganda policy. Now keep in mind, this man was bitterly opposed to the Uganda policy. It had to be Israel or it was nothing at all. And these two men met in a very plush hotel over in England, and a very amazing conversation took place between these two. And this conversation was going to ensure that the prophetic mould that God had said, I'm going to bring you into your own land, was going to stay intact. So here's what the conversation very briefly said. Some of you heard this before, some may not have. It is it's all in his autobiography. Lord Balfour got the first upper hand in his conversation with Chaim Weizmann. He said, listen, I do not understand. A couple of years ago, we offered you Uganda. Why didn't you take that offer? You could have had your people, as a homeland, you could have had Uganda to bring your people back to that land. Why didn't you accept that on behalf of all your people? To which Chaim Weizmann replied, he said, all due respect, Lord Balfour, if I was to ask you to accept Paris, I actually think he said Saskatchewan, which is in Canada, if I was to ask you to accept another city to be the capital city of Britain, how would you feel about that? Would you accept it on behalf of your people? To which Lord Balfour rolled back, it says, and said, don't be daft, man. London has been at the heart of the British people for 1,000 years. To which Chaim Weizmann looked him in the eye and said, Lord Balfour, Jerusalem and Israel have been at the heart of the Jewish people when London was a swamp. And that resonated so much with Lord Balfour that he never forgot that. And some years later, in 1917, he was no longer Prime Minister, but he was Foreign Minister. And guess what? The British had pushed the Turks out of Palestine. They took control of the area of Palestine. Lord Balfour remembered that conversation, and he wrote the Balfour Declaration, and he said, you know what? It gives the government's, His Majesty's government's pleasure to allow Palestine to be a national homeland for the Jewish people. Don't tell me that God's not in control of what's going on. How amazing is that? Ye are my witnesses, says God, that I exist. Well, not a lot of people rush to go home to dry, dusty Palestine after the First World War, let me tell you. But don't forget, this prophecy hadn't been fulfilled yet, because the next part of the prophecy is, hunters will come and they will hunt you back. And there's no greater hunter in Jewish history than that man there. And he hunted the Jews just as the prophet said would happen, out of every hole, out of every cave, out of every dwelling, out of every cellar, out of every hiding spot. He hunted them relentlessly, murdered over 6 million of them, till in the end they had nothing left. Everything was taken away from them, and those that survived the war flooded back to Israel. This man said, who wrote a book called A Nation Reborn, certainly without Nazi persecution, Palestine Jewry would not have even been strong enough to win its war of independence, which, as Pip said, started 73 years ago today. Their war of independence started 73 years ago today. So when you get this graph here, you got the fishermen will try and fish you back. There was a little bit of interest, but no one really flooded back to the land. Then suddenly, hunters will hunt you back. Boom, look at that chart. Look at that graph. You know, God's true to his word. When he says this is going to happen and I'm going to bring you back into your own land after the war, have a look at how they just couldn't wait to get back to the land. And we are, over this weekend, celebrating. It's probably not a word to use at the moment. I'm not sure how much celebration is going on over in Israel at the present moment of time, but it is their 73rd anniversary for the state of Israel being born. Well, we're very, very quick now as we move towards the end of our address this evening, but I just want to show you a little bit more persuasive proof of Bible prophecy. I love this slide here. I think it's one of yours, Pip. I've always remembered this when you did it and I borrowed it off you, and I think this is a fantastic slide because it really shows how powerful the Word of God truly is. Here's what Ezekiel 37 says: I will bring you into your own land of Israel. I will place you into your own land. There's really a repetitive use of this going back to your own land terms. Then shall you know that I, the Lord, hath spoken it and have performed it, saith the Lord. I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. Now have a look at those words. Let's just diagnose a little bit that quotation. This is a remarkable prophecy because where it says, I have spoken it, when was it spoken? Well, it was spoken at the time of Ezekiel, 2,500 years ago. This is what I'm telling you. I am telling you this is what's going to happen. But I'm going to perform it a little bit later down the track. To God, time is of no issue. And in 1948, he actually performed it. There's the proof that there is a God. He spoke it 2,500 years ago. He performed it not all that long ago in the big scheme of things, 1948. How amazing is that? You are my witnesses. So the prophecies about Israel, they're sensational. And we're just touching the surface. You know, you are my witnesses that I actually exist, says God. And there's Tel Aviv today, now currently being bombed. Normally they don't get rockets in Tel Aviv. Well, they are at the moment. It's a very trying time for them. And Israel are indeed God's witnesses. And when you think about the flames that Moses saw in that burning bush and what the Israeli Jewish people have put up for centuries and centuries and centuries, and even specifically in our own, I guess, lifetime, the last 70, 80 years of what went on in their life, and how they were almost destitute and a non-entity, almost completely wiped out. When you think of what they were 80 years ago, and when you think of what they are today, in that land, powerful, incredibly strong economic structure, impressively powerful country, influential on the political world stage, one of the most powerful military forces in the world, and there's only 8 million of them, the population of New South Wales. Oh, seriously? We can't see God working in that nation? Putting him on the world platform to show that he is in existence? 100% he's behind that people. And he wants us to understand that. And he says this in Jeremiah 30 verse 11. I am with you, said the Lord, to save you. Although I make a full end of all the nations wherever I have scattered you, yet will I not make a full end of you. He's kept that promise. And he's going to continue to keep that promise. And so when we ask the obvious question, what is the secret to Israel's miraculous survival and revival, there's only one answer to that, and that's God. Cannot be anything else. You're my witnesses. I've put you there to show this world that I exist. Now, this is our last slide before I end with a song that I really hope you'll enjoy, but not that I'm going to be singing it, by the way. You won't enjoy it if that's the case. When we look at Israel, from its survival through to its revival. It has been an amazing country, to say the least. They're no better than any other country. You know what? God actually says, I'm not doing this for your sakes. In Ezekiel 21, he says, listen, I'm not doing this for Israel's sake. Because they actually, in some cases, have been worse than the other nations. They've turned their back on me time and time and time again. He says, I'm doing this for my holy name's sake. What did he mean by that? Well, what God meant was, I've made promises. I made promises to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And by the way, I didn't say this right at the beginning, but there were two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. God chose to work out his promises through Isaac and through Jacob, not through Ishmael. Does that mean God hates the Arabs? No, it doesn't mean that at all. In fact, they will ultimately be a blessed people in this world. Trust me, God tells us they will be. They are from Abraham as well. But God chose the lineage of Isaac to bring about his plan and purpose and the promises with the Jews. And so he works with them and he says, I've got promises that you will one day be a great nation. And they're not a great nation in the world. In fact, a lot of nations don't like Israel. As Christadelphians, we love Israel because God loves Israel. But God said, I'm not doing this for your sake, I'm doing it for my holy name's sake, and I will keep my promises. But here's the quotation I want to leave you with. It's quite an interesting one because we haven't gone into Scripture deliberately. We put it on the screen because in Ezekiel 37 it says, I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, 1948. The next part of that verse says, and one king shall be king to them all. Who's been the king of Israel since 1948? In fact, who's been the king of Israel since their last king of the Jews, which was a man by the name of Zedekiah that lived 2,500 years ago? They have not had a king. There's never been a king over Israel. But God says, hang on a second, there will be a king. Now, if God has done everything about Israel and fulfilled every prophecy that we have looked at tonight about Israel, why on earth would we doubt that that part there would not be fulfilled? We'd be foolish to think that that's not going to be fulfilled. Oh yeah, God, we can see God. His hand is working in Israel. That's fantastic. He was with them right from the time of the Exodus, and they've had trials and tribulations. But you know what? Like the burning bush, he said they'll never be destroyed. They'll still be with us. They'll still be, and they are, and they have been, and they still are with us. Oh, and God said he's going to bring them back into the land after they've been scattered. He's going to make sure they come back to the land, and they have come back to the land. Why would we deny that part of the prophecy? And one king shall be king to them all. Well, guess what? The Jewish people, or those that at least believe in the Bible, the Jewish people are waiting for that to be fulfilled, and so are Christadelphians. Because the Jewish people are waiting for their Messiah to come and be their king, and so are Christadelphians. And guess what? It's going to be the same Messiah. Because we believe that the Messiah that is coming back to fulfill that role is indeed the Messiah of Israel, prophesied both Old Testament and New Testament, and it is none other than the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be an absolute promise that we can have a lot of faith in God keeping. It will happen. Thank you so much for being with us. I know we've rushed through a lot. It's been a pleasure having you here. I think we need to talk more about Israel. We need to have our prayers and thoughts with them at the moment. You know what? We're not just siding here with Israel and saying everything that's going on is, there's one at fault and one not. There's innocence on both sides. There's innocent people everywhere. But we love Israel. They're our friends. They always have been. They always will be. From 1848, we've had a strong connection with Israel. 100 years before they were even in the land, we've had a close connection. We hope Yuval Miri watching, we hope you enjoyed that. We look forward to, God willing, one day perhaps catching up again over there, if we can get over there. And we certainly trust and pray you'll keep safe in that part of the world, as it is indeed a very difficult time over there. Now I'm going to play this song, I want the Christadelphians to know this is not a Christadelphian production, so please don't be offended. It's a beautiful song. It's a song by a man called a Jewish songwriter, singer by the name of Aaron Shust. What he does is he takes all the Old Testament not all, but many of the Old Testament quotations about Israel returning to the land and the bit of the future about Israel, and he puts it in this quite hauntingly beautiful song that I hope you'll enjoy. And that'll be it from me, Pip. I'll go and sit down and listen to this song as well. I hope that the volume will be all right. I might just hang up here a bit first, but maybe Darren give me a thumbs up if the song's loud enough back there. So thank you again for coming, and hopefully you'll enjoy this song. Oh, actually, Matt, can you turn the lights out? I think it's actually a bit better if we have the lights out for this. Thanks, Matt.
O daughters of Zion, O Abraham's sons, hear the words of your father, hear his promise of love. I will make you a blessing, so count the stars if you can. You will be a great nation. I will give you this land. I will bring you back home. I'll bring you back home, oh my children. You will no longer roam, lost and alone in the night. There is nothing on earth that could take you away. Once I gather you under my wings, I will bring you all back home again. Though you've wandered like strangers to the ends of the earth, I will send you a Savior. I will finish my work. You have no other shepherd. You have no other Lord. Green pastures are waiting in Zion once more. I will bring you back home. I'll bring you back home, oh my children. You will no longer roam, lost and alone in the night. There is nothing on earth that could take you away. Once I gather you under my wings, I will bring you all back home. So we pray for the peace, but look to the east for the sunrise sudden and fierce. Every prophet and priest and king in the city will look on the one they pierced. We will mourn for the one we've pierced. But don't fear, oh my daughters, or sons